The sun was barely rising over the quiet suburban street when the morning peace was shattered by something unusual, something that didn't belong on a calm Saturday like this. Reginald Carter stepped out of his front door holding a black trash bag in one hand and his mug of coffee in the other. He wasn't in uniform. He wasn't in work mode. He was just a man taking his trash to the curb, wearing sweatpants, a plain t-shirt, and that familiar calm expression people in the neighborhood had seen 100 times. His home sat on a well-trimmed lawn, neat hedges, freshly swept driveway. Everything about him said peaceful, but as soon as he reached the middle of the driveway, he noticed them. 3 figures waited near the sidewalk, silent, stiff, and completely out of place. 2 men, dressed in tactical-style vests and dark boots, stood like they were guarding something. Between them stood Linda Whitfield, the president of the Homeowners Association. Sharp blazer, clipped tone, and a reputation for making the smallest issues feel like emergencies. Reginald slowed his steps, not afraid, just observant. Linda's chin lifted like she'd been rehearsing this moment. "Mr. Carter," she called out, voice too loud for the quiet morning. "We need to discuss your ongoing violations." Reginald blinked once, setting the trash bag gently on the driveway. "Good morning to you too," he replied evenly. "What violations are we talking about this time?" One of the men stepped forward, tall, pale, shaved head, mirrored sunglasses hiding his eyes. "Community enforcement," he said flatly, tapping the patch on his vest. "We're here to detain you until a real officer arrives." Reginald stared at him for a long moment, not shocked, not angry, just disappointed. "Detain me?" he repeated, tone almost amused. Linda crossed her arms, confidence swelling. "You've ignored multiple warnings," she said sharply. "Driveway modifications, property rule violations, refusal to attend HOA disciplinary hearings. We're done being lenient." The second man, a shorter guy with a patchy beard and too tight vest, pulled out a folded paper like it was an arrest warrant. "You are to come with us," he declared, though his voice shook just slightly, cooperatively or forcibly. Reginald didn't move. He didn't raise his voice. He didn't posture. He didn't threaten. He simply looked at them. Really looked. Every detail registered. The vests were mismatched. The boots were worn down, secondhand looking. Their posture was stiff, like they practiced in a mirror. There was no badge. No ID. No actual authority. Just costumes. "Let me explain something," Reginald said softly, hands loose at his sides. "There is no such thing as community enforcement. You can't legally detain anyone. You're trespassing." Linda exhaled sharply, annoyed. "You always do this. You think you're above neighborhood rules. You think we won't take action." Reginald's eyes held hers. "What I think," he replied slowly, "is that you're trying to use intimidation to replace leadership." The taller man stepped forward, attempting to reclaim control. "We're not here to argue," he said, jaw tight. "You are being taken in, now." Reginald didn't back up. He didn't tense. He didn't even blink. He simply dropped his trash bag. The bottom tore slightly, aluminum cans rolling across the driveway, clattering loud in the morning stillness. The sound traveled. From behind blinds, curtains shifted. A window opened. A phone camera lifted. An audience formed without a word being spoken. Reginald's voice dropped to a slow, razor-sharp calm. "You're on my property. You're impersonating law enforcement. And you're attempting unlawful restraint." The tall man smirked, mistaking calm for weakness. "We're giving you a chance to comply," he said. "If you resist." Reginald cut him off quietly. "Son, I have dealt with real threats. Real criminals. People who didn't need costumes to be dangerous. And I can tell you right now, you don't want to test me. A teenage boy across the street quietly lifted his phone, hitting record. The story was already leaving the neighborhood. Linda stepped in again, voice rising with desperation rather than authority. Reginald, these men are here to enforce order. You cannot just... Order? Reginald repeated. Order doesn't come from pretending to have power. It comes from responsibility. Something you've forgotten. The bearded man hesitated now. His fingers twitched near his vest strap. He looked uncertain, nervous. But the tall man? He doubled down. We're done talking, he snapped. You're coming with us. He reached toward Reginald. That was the moment the entire neighborhood held its breath. Reginald didn't strike him. He didn't shove him. He didn't threaten him. He simply shifted his weight, grounding his feet, posture relaxed but ready. Every muscle said, I am not scared of you. The taller man stopped, inches away, unsure why his body wouldn't move forward. Because he could feel it now. This wasn't a man caught off guard. This was a man who knew exactly how to end this, if he had to. Reginald spoke one final time, voice low enough for only them to hear. But the street was silent enough everyone heard it anyway. You walked onto the wrong driveway today. The neighborhood didn't know yet who Reginald truly was. But they were about to. And when the truth came out, a quiet tension settled over the street, thick enough that even the wind seemed to pause. Reginald stood still, steady as stone, while the two so-called enforcement officers shifted uneasily. The taller one tried to regain momentum, rolling his shoulders like a man preparing for a fight he wasn't sure he could finish. The bearded one swallowed hard, second thoughts flickering behind his eyes. Linda was fully committed. Her pride had walked her onto this driveway, and pride would not let her step back now. She pointed at Reginald like a judge, ready to deliver a final sentence. This is exactly what I mean, she said sharply. You act like everyone here has to bow to you. You refuse to follow the rules we all follow. You ignore the standards we work hard to maintain in this community. You think you're special. Reginald's expression didn't change. Not anger, not irritation, just clarity. I think, he said softly, that you've confused leadership with control. They're not the same. Linda scoffed. Spare me the lecture. Your grass height has been over-regulation 3 times this year. You repainted your porch without submitting a request form. And let's not forget the alterations to your driveway. Reginald breathed out, almost a laugh. The accessibility rail, the one so my father could walk safely to the door. Linda blinked, caught. She hadn't expected that to become public. The neighborhood definitely hadn't known. Now they did. The tall man tried to redirect, voice louder, firmer, trying to prove he mattered here. Mr. Carter, we need you to come in. Reginald held up one finger. Just one. Not aggressive, not dismissive. Just wait. The man fell silent instantly. It was instinct. Reginald turned, not to Linda, not to the fake officers, but to the neighbors watching from lawns and porches and phones. His voice came out steady, resonant, the kind of voice that doesn't need to rise to be heard. Does anyone here know who these men work for? Silence. No one responded, because no one had ever seen these men before. Everyone thought they were official, but no one could confirm it. Reginald nodded slowly. That's what I thought. The bearded man shifted, nervous now. We were authorized by the HOA board, he muttered. though even he didn't sound convinced. Authorized to do what? Reginald asked. What exactly do you think you're empowered to do on this property? The taller man tried again, voice harsh now, cracks forming. To detain. There is no detainment in HOA code, Reginald interrupted. None. Not in this state. Not anywhere. You are impersonating law enforcement. That is a felony. The taller man's jaw clenched, but beneath the anger, there was fear. Linda stepped forward, voice trembling with rage. You see, you twist everything. You always do. You think just because you served and traveled and have your degrees and your career that you're somehow better than everyone. Reginald finally looked directly at her, and for the first time, something hurt behind his eyes. You know nothing about where I've been, he said quietly. Nothing at all. The bearded man opened his mouth. Maybe to de-escalate. Maybe to speak reason. But the tall one cut him off. That's enough talking, he barked, reaching forward again. You're coming with. He grabbed Reginald's arm. The neighborhood gasped. Reginald didn't shove, didn't strike, didn't even tense. He simply pivoted, a subtle shift of weight, a controlled movement, and the tall man suddenly found his own wrist pinned, his balance gone, his knees bending involuntarily, as Reginald guided him down onto the driveway. Gentle. Precise. Unmistakably trained. The move was so smooth it looked like choreography. The tall man was kneeling before he even understood what had happened. Reginald's voice was soft enough to sound almost kind. I said, don't test me. The bearded man took a step back. Hands lifted, palms open. Not trying to fight, just trying not to collapse. Linda stared, mouth open, caught between shock and fury. You assaulted him, she screamed, voice cracking. He was enforcing community order, and you. Reginald's head turned, slowly, calmly. I didn't assault him. I stopped him. The tall man tried to stand, failed, humiliation burning red in his ears. Reginald released him and stepped back, giving him dignity, giving him space. The man didn't take it. He surged to his feet, but didn't advance. Because now he knew. This wasn't a homeowner. This wasn't a difficult resident. This was someone who had been trained to control chaos, long before this neighborhood even existed. Linda finally found her voice again. Who do you think you are? She demanded, trembling. Reginald looked at her for a long moment. Then he spoke, clearly and simply. The person who tried to live quietly. Who tried to let things be. Who tried to respect everyone here. His eyes met hers, steady, unflinching. But you made this public. You escalated. You brought people to my home. He stepped forward, not aggressive, just present. So now everyone gets to know the truth. The neighborhood leaned in. Every phone recording now had the angle, the audio, the silence. Reginald stood in the center, like the axis of the moment. My rank, my service, my record, my career, my clearance level. He paused. You wanted to check my status before, so let's do that. Linda's face drained of color, because deep down, she already feared the answer. The street had gone silent. Not the kind of silence that comes from peace, but the heavy, breath-holding silence that precedes truth. A few neighbors edged closer to the edge of their lawns. Others raised their phones higher. Kids who were on bikes or scooters froze, 1 foot on the ground, eyes wide. Everyone knew something important was about to be said. Reginald didn't raise his voice. He didn't have to. When I moved here, he began. I chose this neighborhood because I believed it was a place where people respected each other, where differences didn't turn into battles, where my daughter could grow up safe. His voice was calm, but every word landed like weight. He glanced briefly at Linda. But from the first month, you decided that I was a problem. Not because of my house, not because of my lawn, but because I didn't fit the picture in your head of who belongs here. Linda's face tightened. She wasn't as confident now. You're twisting this, she snapped. But her voice was thin, fragile. Reginald continued, as though she hadn't spoken. You filed complaints over my porch lights, my grass, my truck being parked in the driveway while I unloaded groceries. You even sent warnings because my father sat in a lawn chair on the porch one afternoon. There were murmurs now. People didn't know that part. Linda's lips pressed into a hard, sour line. Just tired. My father is a disabled veteran, he said simply. He needed to sit. The bearded fake enforcement man looked away, ashamed. Even the tall one's posture softened a fraction. Reginald nodded once. I let it go. I tried to ignore it. I trimmed the lawn again. I filed the forms. I attended your meetings. I tried to make peace. Linda's voice came out sharp and defensive. Because that's how the community works. No, Reginald said quietly. That's how control works. A soft breeze moved across the street, rustling the leaves. Someone's phone beeped softly, notifications blowing up. The moment was being posted live. Reginald stepped forward just enough to make Linda instinctively take a step back. You wanted to know who I am? He asked. The tall fake officer swallowed hard. Reginald spoke clearly now, every syllable crisp. I served in the United States Army for 21 years. I led humanitarian extraction teams overseas. I coordinated multi-agency rescue operations. And before I retired, I was appointed Deputy Director of Homeland Defense Logistics. The bearded man's eyes widened. The tall man's jaw dropped slightly. Linda blinked rapidly. Deputy Director? She stammered. Reginald nodded once. My job was to solve crises, to protect civilians, to keep communities stable, not tear them apart. Now the weight of who he was hung thick in the air. A child on a scooter whispered to a friend, "He's like, important." Reginald looked at the two men who had shown up to detain him. You were never sent by law enforcement, he said. You were hired. Intimidators. Paid out of HOA funds, I'm guessing. The bearded man shook his head quickly. We were told this was authorized. We thought you saw a black man with confidence, and you decided it was arrogance. You saw discipline and decided it was aggression. You saw calm and mistook it for threat. Linda's breath quickened. That's not what this is. Reginald didn't raise his voice. He didn't need to. Then explain to everyone here, he said softly, why you never filed a single complaint against Mr. Harmon next door, whose grass is taller than mine, or the Millers, who paint their porch every year without filing forms, or the Hendersons, who have 3 unregistered vehicles in their driveway every weekend. Every head in the neighborhood slowly turned toward Linda. She stuttered. Her voice caught. Her jaw clenched, because there was no answer except the one she couldn't say aloud. Reginald stood tall. Not triumphant, not smug, just grounded. I tried to live quietly. I tried to let it go. I tried to belong here. But you made my existence into a battle. And today, you tried to escalate that battle into force. He looked around. At my home. A murmur of anger rippled through the neighbors. Not at him. At her. For the first time since the HOA began its crusade against him, the neighborhood was seeing clearly. Linda's voice broke as she tried to speak. You can't just make this about race. Reginald met her eyes, calm, steady, undeniable. I didn't, he said. You did. Silence echoed. The truth had finally landed. And the street, the neighbors, the men who had come to intimidate him, all now saw the same reality. Reginald Carter hadn't been the problem. He had been the target. The wind moved softly through the neighborhood, carrying with it a shift that everyone felt, even if they couldn't name it. Something had changed. Not loud, not dramatic, but unmistakable. The street that once treated Reginald like a problem was now looking at him like a mirror, not of threat, of truth. Linda stood frozen, fingers still clutched around her clipboard, knuckles white, lipstick trembling at the corners of her mouth. Her carefully curated image, neighborhood leader, order keeper, standard setter, was cracking. And everyone could see it. The tall fake officer quietly stepped away from her, as if realizing he was standing next to something unstable. The bearded one looked sick to his stomach. No one rushed to defend her. No one stepped forward to stand at her side. The power she once held, the invisible social weight she wielded with ease, had slipped from her hands. And there, in the silence, it lay at her feet. Reginald didn't move. He didn't push the advantage. He didn't need to. Truth was doing the work for him. Finally, Mr. Harmon, the older man with thick glasses and a gentle beard who lived 2 houses down, cleared his throat and stepped forward. He wasn't loud. He didn't try to sound brave. He just spoke. I remember when Reginald and his father moved in, he said softly. I remember them building that ramp together. I remember seeing his father sit outside in the afternoons. He looked proud, peaceful. There was something heavy and human in his voice. And I remember, he continued, the letter that showed up in his mailbox 2 days later. The one asking him to remove the ramp because it didn't match the neighborhood's visual cohesion. Gasps spread through the crowd like wind catching flame. Reginald didn't speak. He didn't confirm. He didn't deny. He didn't have to. The truth was already out. Mrs. Alvarez stepped closer next, leaning on her cane. We all saw what happened, she said, voice steady despite her age. We just didn't want problems, so we stayed quiet. Her eyes moved to Reginald, not full of apology, but acknowledgement. That was wrong. The neighborhood didn't gasp this time. They listened. Because the words weren't dramatic. They were honest. Reginald nodded slightly, a quiet acceptance. Not forgiveness, not erasure. Just acknowledgement of acknowledgement. Linda tried to regain footing. Her voice came out sharp, shaky, desperate. You're all turning this into something it isn't. I didn't do anything wrong. I'm enforcing the rules. If we start letting one person ignore them, everything falls apart. But her words rang hollow now. Rules weren't the point. Fairness was. And everyone could see that now. Mr. Chen, the jogger, spoke next. His voice was calm, his tone respectful. We all want a neighborhood that feels safe, he said. But safety doesn't mean pushing someone out because they're different. He looked at Reginald, then at everyone else. Respect is not one person deciding for everyone. Respect is shared. It was the kind of statement that sits down inside people and stays there. Linda's breath quickened. She looked around, waiting for someone to step in. Someone to save her. Someone to remind the neighborhood who she was supposed to be. No one did. The silence around her wasn't empty. It was truth settling in. Her voice cracked when she spoke again. I was only trying to Reginald finally spoke. Not loud, not sharp, just true. You were trying to control something that was never yours to control. Linda's eyes flickered. Anger, fear, confusion, humiliation, swirling, unresolved. Reginald didn't move toward her. He didn't crowd her. He gave her space. Leadership is not forcing compliance, he said softly. It's listening, understanding, making room for others, even when they're different from you. His next words were gentle, but they broke something open. You don't have to be the enemy here, Linda, but you do have to stop acting like you own the neighborhood. Her face crumpled, but she refused to cry. Pride is a cage with no door. I was trying to keep things the same, she whispered. Reginald's voice softened. Things can't stay the same forever. People live here, grow here, change here. That's what makes a community. Not sameness, respect. The bearded fake officer slowly removed his vest. I'm done, he murmured, stepping back. The tall one followed, though stiffly. They weren't soldiers. They weren't villains. They were just men who'd been told the wrong story. The moment wasn't triumphant. It was human, raw, uneasy, real. The neighborhood wasn't cheering. They weren't clapping. They weren't picking sides. They were seeing clearly for the first time. And clarity changes things. Slowly, quietly, but permanently. Reginald looked around. Not victorious, not relieved. Just steady. I don't want to fight with anyone here, he said. I never did. I just want to live. Like any of you. No one argued, because there was nothing left to argue. This wasn't a war. It was a correction, a shift, a truth finally seen. The crowd slowly began to disperse, not with tension, but with reflection. People didn't avoid Reginald anymore. Some nodded, some paused, some simply met his eyes. Acknowledgement, recognition, respect. Linda remained on the sidewalk, frozen in place. Reginald didn't approach her. He simply walked back up his driveway, steady, unrushed, certain, because the war wasn't won by force. It was won the moment he refused to become what was projected onto him. The lesson was complete, but the aftermath? That was still coming. The days that followed felt different. The street didn't look different. The houses still stood in perfect rows. The lawns were still manicured. The mail still arrived at 11:17 every morning. But something in the air had shifted. Respect doesn't enter a place loudly. It settles. Like dust in sunlight. Soft, quiet, undeniable. And the neighborhood was finally beginning to see. The HOA board called an emergency session that week. Not the usual monthly meeting, with coffee cups and folded agendas. This one had weight, whispers, a heaviness people could feel as soon as they took their seats. Mrs. Alvarez sat near the front. Armin 2 rows back. Parents, retirees, joggers, gardeners, all of them there. The people who had once looked away now leaned forward. At the center of the long wooden table sat Linda. Not standing, not commanding, sitting. Her hands folded so tightly, her knuckles turned pale. She didn't look at anyone. Not because she was ashamed, but because she didn't know how to look at them now. Control had always been her language. But now, she had nothing to hold on to. The board president, Mr. Lanning, cleared his throat. Thank you all for coming, he began, voice thin. We're here today to review complaints, decisions, and use of HOA authority by the acting board president. Everyone knew what that meant. The room didn't need drama. The silence was the drama. Linda finally spoke, voice shaky, brittle around the edges. "I only ever tried to maintain standards," she said. "We have rules for a reason. If we let one violation go, others follow. If we don't enforce order, things fall apart." Her voice cracked. Not dramatically, just humanly. "I was trying to protect our community." A few heads nodded, not in agreement, but in understanding. Because fear is a powerful architect. Fear of losing control. Fear of change. Fear of being overlooked. And fear disguised as rules can look a lot like leadership until it's held up to the light. Mr. Chen spoke first. Calm. Gentle. "No one disagrees with rules," he said. "We disagree with how they were used." Mrs. Alvarez followed, leaning on her cane, voice steady. "You didn't protect the community, Linda. You protected your place in it." The words didn't lash. They landed. Soft. True. Heavy. Linda swallowed hard. Her eyes flicked to the door where Reginald stood. Not in the center. Not in the spotlight. Just present. He hadn't asked to speak. He wasn't here to confront. He was simply there. And sometimes, presence is louder than accusation. Mr. Harmon, thoughtful and quiet as always, spoke next. "We all saw a man living peacefully," he said. "And we all saw a neighbor who could not tolerate it." He paused, not because he broke rules, but because he didn't bend. The boardroom didn't gasp. It didn't need to. Everyone knew. People didn't avoid truth because it was unclear. They avoided it because it was uncomfortable. But comfort was gone now, and what remained was reality. "Sir," Lanning exhaled, voice tired. "We need to vote." No build-up, no speeches, no dramatic pacing, just decision. All in favor of removing Linda Whitfield as HOA president. Hands rose. Slow, reluctant, resolute. Almost every hand. Even two of her longtime supporters raised theirs. Eyes lowered, heavy with the weight of somewhere they went wrong. Linda didn't look around. She didn't defend. She didn't argue. She simply let out a breath she had been holding for years. Because sometimes power is not taken from you. Sometimes you finally let go, because holding it has worn you down to bone. Outside, after the meeting, the sunlight was warm. Not sharp, not blinding, just warm. People filtered out slowly, stopped by Reginald. Not to apologize, words weren't needed. Just to stand with him. A nod, a hand on a shoulder. A simple, "glad you stayed." Small gestures can rebuild what conflict tears apart. Maya pulled up in her old sedan, engine rattling like always. She stepped out, no questions, just reading the moment in the air. Reginald didn't smile proudly. He didn't sigh in relief. He just existed, fully, calmly, rightfully. Maya leaned on the hood beside him. "Well," she said quietly, "that's that." Reginald shook his head gently. "No," he murmured. "That's the beginning." Because peace isn't restoring what was. Peace is creating what should have been. Neighborhoods don't heal in applause and celebration. They heal in sidewalks swept a little slower, in lawn chairs shared, in eye contact returned, in names learned instead of categories assumed. And that healing had just begun. Across the street, Linda sat in her car, engine off, keys still in the ignition, staring forward. Not angry, not plotting, not destroyed. Just quiet, processing. For the first time in years, she wasn't leading anything. She didn't know who she was without control. But the world wasn't asking her to disappear. It was asking her to learn. Growth hurts, but it also opens doors, slowly, quietly, but undeniably. Reginald walked back up his driveway, home, not defended, not reclaimed. Simply recognized. The first place that had tried to push him out had finally learned to make room. Not for him despite who he was, but because of exactly who he was. Life didn't suddenly become perfect. There were no banners, no block parties, no speeches about lessons learned. Real change rarely announces itself. It shows up quietly, in the pauses, in the way people look at one another, in the way a street feels when the tension is finally gone. Over the next week, the neighborhood moved the way neighborhoods do. Sprinklers clicked on at dawn. Kids rode scooters along the sidewalk. Mothers pushed strollers. Old men watered lawns they didn't really need to water. But there was a new softness to it all. People looked longer when they walked past Reginald's house. Not suspicious, not wary. Aware, respectful. Present. They saw him now, not as a story told through rumor. Not as a warning passed between garden club whispers. Not as a problem. But as a man. A person. Someone who lived among them rather than beneath their judgment. One evening, Mrs. Alvarez shuffled across the street, carrying a covered dish. Reginald opened his door before she knocked. She lifted the casserole slightly. "It's a roast con pollo. I make it on Sundays," she said. Reginald smiled, warm and small. "Thank you, Mrs. A. P.E. Yeah. That was enough. The younger couple down the street, the ones who always waved awkwardly and then looked away, finally walked over one afternoon, with their toddler holding a foam soccer ball. They lingered at the edge of the lawn. The father cleared his throat. "Our son, likes kicking balls. Needs someone calm to play with. We thought maybe." Reginald crouched down, looked the toddler in the eyes, and smiled. "I think I can handle that." The child beamed. The parents exhaled. A whole new chapter began right there. Without speeches, without apologies, without unearthing blame, just connection. And slowly, steadily, softly, the neighborhood shifted. Not because of punishment, but because everyone finally saw each other. Meanwhile, Linda stayed inside. The blinds remained closed. The car stayed parked. The porch stayed empty. No more HOA patrols. No more clipped warnings. No more tight smiles at mailboxes. But this wasn't defeat. This was reflection. The kind that takes time. The kind that hurts in places no one can see. One afternoon, as Reginald was pulling weeds from a flower bed, the sound of a front door creaked open. Linda stepped outside. No makeup. No clipboard. No armor. Just a woman with a tired face and hands that didn't know where to rest. She walked halfway across her lawn and stopped. Reginald looked up. Not tense. Not expectant. Just listening. "I didn't know how to let go," she said quietly, but with recognition. "I wasn't protecting the neighborhood," she admitted. "I was protecting the picture of myself in it." Reginald nodded. Gentle, steady. "You don't have to be who you were," he said. "You can start fresh, just like anyone else." Linda blinked, just once, just slowly. Not absolved, but understood. She nodded, then turned, walked back toward her house. No big emotional ending. No sudden transformation. Just the first step. and some steps need silence to carry them. That evening, Reginald sat on his porch again. Cup of tea, soft breeze, sunset lowering like a curtain of warm gold across the street. Maya joined him without knocking, as she always did. Dropped into the chair beside him, folded her arms, looked out at the neighborhood. "You know," she said, "a lesser man would have burned everything down." Reginald chuckled. "A loud fight is easy," he said. "A quiet stand is harder." Maya nodded. "But the quiet stand lasts longer." Reginald looked out at his driveway. Clean, open, unquestioned. "Yeah," he said softly. "It does." Summer arrived quietly in the neighborhood, not with fanfare, just the soft sound of lawn sprinklers, children laughing in driveways, birds calling from telephone wires. The world continued the way it always had. But something in it had changed. Not loudly, not dramatically, but deeply. Reginald sat on his porch one warm evening, the sky painted with streaks of orange and rose. The neighborhood around him felt different now. Not because he'd won anything, but because he'd finally been seen. Respect doesn't come from fear. Respect comes from understanding. And the people here understood now. A slow crunch of gravel sounded as Mr. Harmon walked up the driveway holding a small wooden box. He nodded to Reginald, then sat beside him. No request, no hesitation, just comfort. The kind born from mutual respect. He opened the box. Inside lay an old, folded American flag, faded slightly from time, still handled with reverence. "This belonged to your father," Mr. Harmon said quietly. "He let me hold on to it when he first moved in. Said he didn't want it sitting in a box alone. Said it belonged where it could breathe." Reginald's throat tightened, not with grief, with memory. His father had always believed in people, even when they failed him, even when the world felt heavy. "He thought this neighborhood would be good for you," Mr. Harmon continued. He was right. Reginald exhaled, slow, steady. "He believed in second chances," he said. Mr. Harmon smiled, gentle and warm. "So do you." He placed the flag into Reginald's hands. No speech, no ceremony, just meaning. Across the street, Linda stepped out onto her porch. She didn't come over. She didn't wave. She didn't avoid him either. She just stood, looking at the two of them, quietly accepting that healing is not a performance. Growth happens in the silence, and sometimes the simplest acknowledgement is enough. Later, Maya joined him again, carrying 2 ice pops like they were gourmet desserts. She handed him one. "Neighborhood peace offering," she announced dramatically. Reginald raised an eyebrow. "From who?" Maya leaned back in her chair. "Me," she said. "I'm the entire neighborhood. You're welcome." P laughed. Really laughed. Not a polite smile. Not a measured exhale. A full laugh. The kind that loosens the chest and clears the air. Maya grinned and said, "Feels better than fighting, huh?" Reginald nodded. "It always does. People just forget how to get here." She looked out across the street, where Mrs. Alvarez chatted with the couple and their toddler, where Mr. Chen jogged past with his hands raised in lazy greeting, where kids rode bikes freely, where neighbors smiled at one another without hesitation. "Think they'll stay like this?" she asked. Reginald considered. "Maybe," he said. "Maybe not every day. People slip. Fear creeps back. Ego grows. But now they know better. Now they've seen what respect looks like. That doesn't disappear. Sometimes the battles we fight aren't loud. They only break windows and leave bruises or scars. Then, this has always been home. Sometimes the battles we fight aren't loud. Sometimes the hardest battles are the ones where we refuse to become the version of ourselves the world tries to force on us. Strength isn't always raised voices or clenched fists. Sometimes strength is a quiet stand, a stillness in the storm, a simple truth that doesn't move when the world pushes. And when truth stands long enough, the world learns to stand with it.